Good evening, folks. And tonight, we're going to talk about allies. Who were our allies and enemies during the Civil War? And who supported the Confederacy and who supported the Union? Well, the battles were drawn. We all know that during certain parts of the war, Brazil pretty much was sided with the Confederacy. If this turned out to be a global war, we all know where we'd be heading. After all the states seceded from the Union and the Confederate States were formed, Brazil pretty much made it perfectly. Great Britain made it perfectly clear. They recognized the Confederacy. So did Brazil and Egypt. Japan was already fighting a war with the United States. They were trying to have their own separate conference scene, but they also threw their support for the Confederates. Even though the weirdest thing about it, even though Great Britain showed absolutely zero feelings for had absolutely no slavery, they still supported the Confederates. Despite having no support for slavery, despite having nothing for slavery, they still supported the Confederates. Now, when it came to the countries, and France for that matter, they also supported them because they followed the British. But however, they had their own thoughts in mind. Here come the countries that supported the Union. You have Siam. SIAM. They wanted to supply elephants, but the Union declined. Then you have the Kingdom of Hawaii, which at the time wasn't really part of the United States, but actually was more part of America. Then you have Canada, which, when slaves ran away, slaves would run into Canada and seek asylum in Canada from the Confederates. However, the Confederates also Canada also kind of supported the Confederacy when it came to certain other things. But however, Canada remained a neutral country for that matter. Then there was France. The French also supported the Union when it came to weapons. They supplied them with weapons. Weirdly enough. The Netherlands. They would ship the slaves to Netherlands to hide out in the Netherlands until 1864, when the idea literally ended, when they couldn't really send them there anymore because their supplies, they would be spotted by either them or anything else. Then there was Mexico, another part Mexico, because the liberal Mexicans sided with them, while the enemy Mexicans, such as the conservative Mexicans, hated the idea. They wanted to remain. They were more loyal to the Confederates than they were the actual Union. Then you have the Prussians, aka the Germans. The Prussians were more for the Union. Were also for the Union because even though they had Prussian soldiers go on the side of the Union, go on the side of fought for the Confederates, even though they were on the side of the Confederates, and later on, a few actually served during World War I, actually. Weird how that works out, right? We'll talk about that another time. Now, some of these soldiers who fought during during the Civil War, made it seem more hard and time appeasing. Now, another ally for the Union was the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was another adversary for the Confederates. They never really cared for them. And then you have the strongest ally of the Union of them all. Actually, then we have Austria. Before we get there, Austria, another supporter of the Union. They pretty much followed Italy. And Italy, another one who didn't really care for the slaves, who didn't care for owning slaves. They are also against slavery. Now, these two countries right there, now we got our biggest love of all, Russia. Our current adversary right now was our strongest friend during that time frame. They hated the Confederates. They made this perfectly clear. And I say these quotes, as a matter of fact, the Russians made a visit to the Union, made a visit to the United States. And they were praised by everybody here in the United States. At least on the Union side, they were actually feared by the Confederates. Because the Russian Confederation made it perfectly clear. Admiral Stephen Lajowski, actually, let me pronounce that. Admiral Stephen Lizvalsky made this perfectly clear. The Atlantic Theater he was in charge of, he made this perfectly clear. If any foreign nation were to shoot on my fellow Americans, were to shoot on my fellow allied Union troops, Union Americans, I will shoot back. I will fire back on them, and we will start a war with you. Very hard truth to that. The Russians made it perfectly clear. We will fight back and save you. Now who knows why he didn't really support strongly and actually defend his American supporters and actually stop the Confederates, actually, at the time. I mean, the Russians could have easily gotten involved. Now, it's just like the Revolutionary War. The British asked for 20,000 troops from Russia. The Russians perfectly declined that offer. But again, later on in the war, they asked for additional 20,000 troops. Declined. No support from Russia at all. And the Union won it. And we became a country, all because Russia didn't get involved. But this time, Russia was actually on both ports, the Pacific coast and the Atlantic coast. And California was very welcoming, and so was Virginia, and a lot of those, Virginia was technically and some of it made a port of areas that it made it to. Virginia might have been there, but heck, the Tsar Alexander II, who was part of there, they stayed in there in 1864 is when the Russians sailed over there, and they pretty much made it perfectly clear to the Confederates: you make any wrong moves, we'll get you. That's pretty much what the Russians pretty much all posted it to them. And the Post pretty much made it perfectly clear as well. Don't make any moves with me. And sure enough, they didn't even bother messing with the Russians when they went back in the water. They did not try to make a move towards the Russians. They stayed away from the Russians. The Russians went back out in the water, went about their ways, went back to Russia safely. Not a single touch. They were safe. And if the British were to open fire on Americans, war would be in the process. They were ready to fight off any enemy that would shoot at the Americans, or the Union at that time, aka Union, or Yankees. That's what the Confederates called them, or for that matter, the British. I mean, that's literally what this has come to. But literally, this is all. Canada was pretty much well known for a lot of love-lost relations. I mean, they pretty much will. The Confederates will try to come and claim their slaves in Canada on some occasions, But they were mostly denied most of the time. 99% of the time they were declined. They were declined their slave when they got into Canada, because it was a free country. If they were caught in Ohio or some of those other states, they would send them back. This is before the Civil War began. They would send them back to the state they originally came from, the slave state they originally came from. So they did the Underground Railroad station, made it all the way to even the Underground Railroad stations to like certain houses in Ohio. They would make stops up there and get like water or something. Then they continue on their way to Canada. And once they made it into Canada, that's where they would make the stop at and say, hey, we made our final destination. We're free now. That's how they did it against the Confederates. Well, if you like this video, hit the like button, hit the bell for more notifications. With that being said, I'm out of here. Peace.